Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to today's press call with the Jerusalem Press Club. With Washington closing its embassy in Kiev following further deployment of Russian troops along the border, which some of whom were already since pulled back, the question of an imminent war remains looming. Israel, like many other countries, called on citizens to evacuate earlier this week. Joining JPC today to shed light on what Jerusalem's perspective of the situation might be is former member of the Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, Ksenia Svetlova, a member of Israel's parliament on behalf of the Zionist Union between 2015 and 2019. Today, she's a senior fellow at both the Institute for Policy Research at Reichman University and at the Mitvim Institute. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Svetlova.
Thank you so much. How many time do we have, more or less? So
we have about half an hour.
Half an hour, and will there be questions in the end?
Yes. You can either begin with a brief introduction,
Yes.
or we can just go straight into the questions.
Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I think that now it's really, the historical time when we speak about the possibility of war that had the potential to develop into a third world war. And now, as we discuss it, the Russian troops are pulling back. And we see the signs since yesterday, we see this clear signs of de-escalation between two countries. But we still have to analyze what happened just now. How did the power play between the great powers, United States, Russia, and also China, a little bit behind, played out? And what will happen next in Europe specifically, with the also energetic dependency of Germany and other states of Russia, and also the Russian influence in the post. Sorry, there is somebody has his mic open, I think. Perhaps you can close the mic,
Yes.
guys.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So I don't like usually to say I told you so, but in this case, I think that I definitely have written about the Russian perspective on this whole event. I can tell you that in my assessment there was not an intent on behalf of Russia to invade Kiev, to occupy the western part of the country, to control Ukraine with the help of its armed forces. And what Russia actually wanted to do here is to make a signal that it is a power that has to be taken into consideration in any global event, and specifically with everything that has to do with the security architecture in Europe. And second of all, that it will not allow to NATO to expand further on the expense of post-Soviet republics that are not already part of it. So we are talking about, of course, Ukraine. We are possibly talking about Moldova. We are talking about Belarus, that during these current events became another Russian base. And it will host about 30,000 soldiers that are already stationed there for indefinite time. Perhaps it will be a little less in the future, but still. And by drawing attention, maximum attention, in the midst of Vienna talks with Iran, in the midst of the crisis with Kazakhstan, and everything else that is going on in the world, Putin was able, as a to use all of his abilities to draw attention to himself. We saw a parade of Western leaders going to Russia, calling Putin, meeting with Putin, and everything else. And I think that if anybody from the heads of the post-Soviet states had any ideas of further approachment with the West, well, I think that they will now seriously reconsider it, not because of Putin threats, but because of European and American willingness to sacrifice Ukraine and to launch this war, if you might, on the expense of Ukrainian citizens and Ukrainian stability, without reaching out to them, without providing a significant help and protection. The story doesn't begin now. It doesn't also begin in 2014. Back in '99, we remember Primakov, the then Prime Minister of Russia, when he was on his way to a state visit to the United States, he was updated that the NATO alliance is pounding Yugoslavia without the approval of the UN Security Council, in contrary to Russians' view on that. He made a U-turn over the Atlantic, and he came back to Moscow for consultations, basically signaling that Russia is not about to cooperate with the unipolar world in which US and of course NATO project. They are the only power that project their influence in Europe. And since that day, I think after half a year, 6 months, 7 months, Vladimir Putin became a president. The only thing that didn't change during this 20 years was his readiness to fight the expansion of NATO and also an attempt to destabilize NATO in all cost. So he was ready to use the hybrid war. He was ready to use information campaigns. He was ready to use right-wing and extreme left-wing parties in Europe that were receiving and are still receiving Russian funding in order to divide and rule between the Europeans and the United States, divide between the Eastern Europe and Western Europe, and here you have the Visegrad Union, and divide, if possible, between Israel and its main ally, United States, fearing any consequences on our northern border. And since Israel needs so much cooperation of Russia in Syria, I think Russians were counting that Israel will continue to be silent about the current crisis. And we indeed saw it in the statements of the Foreign Minister Yair Lapid and the Foreign Minister in general, an attempt to go in between the parties without naming names and talking about Russian aggression or possibility of war that will be launched by Russia or any of that. Again, for the time being, this policy was acceptable because also the Americans understood that Israel needs to do this balancing act. But if we imagine for a second that the war would actually start and that there would be bodies piling up, that there would be people who will be dying during this war, would Israel be able to maintain its neutrality? And actually, if yes, then at what cost? There are many questions that are rising right now. I will briefly touch them so that perhaps we can go and take as much of your questions as possible. But there is also a question, of course, of future security architecture in Europe, because even if there is no war right now, first of all, war is already going on since 2014 in Ukraine. People are dying. Almost 10,000 people lost their lives as the result of this war. And this conflict, it's not even a sleeping conflict like in Georgia. It's a warm conflict. And now with recognition of Donetsk and Lugansk republics, Russia will also have the official legitimation to interfere in case that the Russian citizens and the Russian people of Russian ethnicity will be threatened there and so on. So the casus belli remains. It's not going away. It's good to know that there will not be perhaps a full-scale war right now. I think it's definitely a relief for the Ukrainians. But by the way, if you heard there are Ukrainian experts and Ukrainian politicians during the last few weeks, you probably heard that many of them were saying there will not be a war. Be sure that this is not what Putin wants. He wants, yes, to dominate over Ukraine. He wants to have a say in what Ukraine does. But from that, to basically conquering Ukraine and invade to Kiev and so on, there is a huge difference in that. And then again, the Russian intentions were judged perhaps mistakenly. The Russian head, the Russian psychic, what do they want? Russia is not the Soviet Union. We are not in Cuba in '62. the ideology that used to be the moving force, at least back then in the 60s, it does not exist anymore. There is no ideology behind what is being done right now by the Russians. Mainly what we do have is the attempt to project power globally, and of course in Europe as well, to, if possible, to weaken NATO and to eventually perhaps bring to creation of new security architecture in Europe, which eventually will be led by the Russians. How will Europeans act, and how will they work within the frame of NATO, and how will they overcome their differences in order to combat against this goal? Again, not everybody believes that they should be on the besides the two parts of the aisle, with the Russians. Look at Hungary, look at Slovakia, look at other states, and the divisions, I'm afraid, between the key NATO allies, Germany and United States, regarding Russia, regarding energetic dependency, the Nord Stream 2 and so on. This will keep growing from now on. And of course, there is a question of Eastern Ukraine. I think that since the war is already happening there is no reason, to be oblivious to the reality. A war can, reignite there at any given time. It can happen 2 days after the so-called D-Day, the 16th of February. It can happen after 2 years or after 2 months. We do not know. The only thing is this to take into encounter is that the post-Soviet states, they, I think, understood exactly, what are they dealing with. This is, of course, first of all, has to do with Belarus that witnessed an attempt to change a regime in 2020. So this is not something that will happen in the close times. Moldova, that is being reproaching to Europe. But again, I think that there is this very powerful message right now that was put in their face, basically. Yes, that this is what's gonna happen to you guys if you would want to join, the EU, join the NATO. First of all, nobody's waiting for you there. This is first. Look at Georgia, look at Ukraine, and if Russia will intimidate you, then your friends in the West, will send you, some military equipment, but you will have to fight this fight against the Russian bear alone. So this is my briefing, and perhaps if there are questions, I will be very happy to answer them. Whether through chat you can send it, or just raise your hand and answer.
Great.
And,
Thank you so much. I think the reporters on the line are very interested in what you were saying in terms of Israel's position in this balancing act that they must must hold between Russia, U.S., Ukraine. Before we touch on U.S. and Russia, which obviously is kind of the bigger issue at hand, where does this leave Israel's relationship with the Ukraine? It was reported that Israel stopped supplying the Iron Dome missile defense system. What can we see soon on that end?
First of all, any reports that were around here for the last few weeks, I'm not saying that I doubt their credibility, but everything has to be verified time and again. There were a lot of misinformation during this war, obviously. This is how the wars of the future will look like. The war that didn't happen, I have to say. But we as journalists, as reporters, as analysts have to be extra careful. For example, there was information that Israel is about to stop the supplies of weapons to Ukraine through to the Baltic states. Okay, so this information I personally could not find any reference to it. I could not verify it. So therefore, there are a lot of question marks about what happened. But I have to tell you that the Ukrainians are. They expressed their disappointment from Israel. For them, Israel is always the example of a state that is surrounded by enemies and was able to elevate itself and develop and become a democratic Western state. So the Ukrainians always look up to Israel, and some of them were very disappointed by what they called taking the pro-Russian line. So there was a criticism that was forwarded at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Foreign Affairs itself. Some of them who were saying that the Israelis must understand, since they understand the Russian head much better than perhaps the US, that there will not be a war. So why do they evacuate? Why do they call their citizens to come back? Why do they choose to ruin our economy? So this kind of statements are rather common right now among the Ukrainians, in the press, in the social media, among friends even. And it will take time to regain trust and to show that yes, Israel is ready and willing to maintain its relations and develop them further on, and that it's a partner that can be counted on. So this is, I think, what is happening in regards to Ukraine. But again, you know, the Ukrainians, of course, they knew that Israel has kind of a special relations with Russia, which is not its a strategic ally, of course, not like the United States, it will never be. But there is a consideration of what Israel can or cannot do. Now, there is a big question mark about this. You know, perhaps Israel, when it's now playing in the adult club, you know, in Syria and in other spaces, has to be open and put its cards on the table. Yes, Israel has a strategic alliance with the United States. This is something to be respected, even if Russia would prefer that it would be the other way around. But one of my friends, Vera Michlin, who is right now in the King's College in London, she's a visiting professor, wrote an article lately, you can find it at the Institute for Modern Russia, that basically made this analysis of how, you know, things can develop later. And there is a big question mark on the Israel's ability to continue walking this fine line and to make friends with everybody, okay, to be nice to everybody. There can also be an opportunity in the future, given Israel's special place in the international arena, its closeness to the United States, and the set of relations with both Ukrainians and Russians. There could be some spaces for also negotiations and perhaps a more, you know, important Israeli role than just reaching out to the Jewish communities on both sides. But it depends on the maturity of the Israeli foreign policy and its self-awareness. Okay, where does Israel stand in the international system? I think that since we assume that the struggle between Russia and NATO, the collective West will continue, and it will even become more, I think, dangerous, and it will expand to more spheres. Israel would eventually have to, you know, choose a space for itself. It can't be neutral forever.
And how could that influence perhaps Israel's understandings with Russia when it comes to its presence in Syria?
Look, since we are talking about Syria, I have to remind you that just recently, despite the Israel very careful crafted policy towards the two countries, Russia was very critical of the continuation of Israeli activity in Syria. And perhaps this image of power that it wants to project now in Europe, it will also pursue the same image also in the Middle East. And it means also curbing the independence of Israel and the Israeli in Syria. So perhaps Israel, even without taking a stand on Ukraine or on other issues between the West and the East, perhaps it will find itself in a not very comfortable position vis-a-vis the Russians, because the agreements are good only until they're working. When they will be no longer effective, for the Russians, then, Israel will find out, and perhaps it will be the difficult way.
Just a follow-up question to that. Do you think this could have could this change if there's a change in power in the Israeli government, if we're seeing, I don't know, maybe elections down the line?
No, actually, I do not think that this is crucial, for Russian-Israeli relations. The Russian leadership is interested in good relations with Israel. It has, I think Israel, we saw it on many occasions. It was the only Western power that sent its representatives to celebrate the Victory Day, the 9th of May, in the Red Square, when everybody else was shunning Moscow and did not even think to travel there. There are also some perspectives of the cooperation in everything that regards to the soft power, combat against anti-Semitism. For example, Israel plays a major role for Russia, in this regard. It's important because since they blame the Europeans and specifically the Ukrainians for being anti-Semitic or being lenient, and not enough tough in the battle against the anti-Semitism and neo-Nazism. So Israel is specifically important in this regard. So I think that no matter who is the prime minister, there will be relations with Russia. And the question is, of course, it cannot even relate to the internal Russian Israeli politics. What Russia wants in Syria. What does it want in Syria? If it thinks, if it assesses that Israeli activities are damaging to Assad regime, if there is some kind of internal deal between them and the Iranians in Vienna, for example, yes. So we could see a tougher tone, for example, vis-a-vis Israel. I don't think that there is any kind of relation to who is the person who is in charge right now, who is the PM in Israel.
Okay, very clear. We have a question on Aliyah. Current estimates put Israelis living in the Ukraine between 10 to 15,000, and that's not even just the Jewish population living there. Do you believe that these developments could lead to a significant emigration of Jews to Israel, perhaps even from Russia, as concerns for safety mount?
It's a good question because we, of course, saw the influx of immigrants from Ukraine during the events in 2014. And I remind that despite the annexation of Crimea and some military activity in the east, the western part of the country, Kiev, of course, were not affected. And still we did saw some 30,000 people, I think, that they made immigration. I think that any destabilization of security can bring people who were doubting, their chances, or we're not sure whether they want to make the Aliyah. It can bring them closer to make this decision. However, I don't think that it will be as significant and large as Israel expected if the war would really begin and we would see the military activity, tanks rolling, then of course it would be perhaps thousands versus hundreds, at the current moment. As for Russia, well, I have to tell you that, building on personal relations, that I have there, and part of my family still lives there. My father lives in Moscow. Some of my good friends are there, colleagues, journalists. None of them thought that war is an option. None of them thought that it's a possibility. So you could say that perhaps they were naive and probably, due to Western intelligence and due to this specific tactic of outing Russia, the war was prevented, maybe, but none of them felt stressed because they didn't feel that the war is around the corner. So there is also that, so people who didn't make Aliyah so far, maybe they will still wait and think, so what can happen, how their lives will be affected if they go, if they will not go. Not necessarily that, right now they will make this decision because, again, war is on hold. It's not over completely because, again, it started in 2014 and anybody who lives in Donetsk area will testify, yes, that the military activity is ongoing all the time, So, of course, it can always widen. It can always be ignited. It can always be more threatening than it is of the today. And still, I think that the doomsday scenario that was discussed widely in the Western press, this is, as it seems right now, it's not about to happen.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we have time just for one more question. One reporter is asking how such a war, if it ends up being a relatively significant one, could impact Israel or the Middle East in terms of economics. Could we see a delay in the supply of goods, perhaps? What are we talking about on that end?
Well, if there is a war again, so then countries that has dependency on Russian wheat or Ukrainian wheat, and we are mostly talking about Egypt right now, we are talking about Iraq, I think, Iran perhaps, then, there might be some delay in supplies, but as far as I understand, for example, specifically for Egypt, there is not a problem to change, the supplies. And this is what they did, by the way, during the COVID, when the COVID just started and Russia decided to freeze the export of wheat to Egypt. So it was quickly replaced by other supplies. So I think countries now gained more experience in finding an alternative to goods that can be stored. But I do think that there could be a major influence, perhaps not even on Middle East, but on Asia, because if there will be a stall in supplies of gas and oil, from Russia and Ukraine, you can imagine what can happen to China if oil will climb up and there will be a shortage of at least even 0.5%, and in supplies to China, whole areas would be detached of electricity and lacking fuel. So this is something real, something that I don't think how much it was discussed, but I did discuss it with some colleagues who explore China. And for them, I think they were also the stabilizing factor in this regard. Putin, just went to Beijing and met with Xi. He participated in the Olympics. Also, the war in Ukraine, of course, was discussed there. And perhaps one of the things that were told between the two men, the exchange between the two men, is be careful with what you do in order to not to interrupt our, oil supplies, because this could be devastating, very dangerous.
Absolutely. Just one follow-up question that a reporter is asking, if you could repeat again the number of Ukrainians killed since 2014?
The Ukrainian side assesses that up to 10,000 people were killed during the hostilities that were started in 2014 and until 2020. Okay, so this is including, of course, also the members of the combat, but also innocent citizens that were killed in Lugansk, Donetsk, and the whole Donbass area.
Of course, very clear. Former Knesset member Ksenia Svetlova, thank you again for speaking with us today. I hope that the next time we speak, it will be under more positive conditions.
Absolutely.
I'd also like to thank JPC Director General Uri Dromi and Press Coordinator Eli Klotzstein for their work on this briefing. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day, and let it be peace.
We hope you enjoyed that briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. If you did, like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our future content.